Hello, and welcome to another episode of Kaleidoscope. My guest today is someone that you may be very familiar with, John Arnold, the town moderator. Welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Good. Now, a lot of people around town know your face and know who you are, but on Kaleidoscope, we like to find out things about you that shake up what people think they know about you and what some really interesting things about you. So let's start with, you have an interesting job here in town as elected official, as town moderator. And I've been to the meetings, all day affairs and sometimes 2 days. And one of the things I did notice about you during those, before I knew you personally, was that you have this nice, calming rhythm to how you run the meeting, and yet you can be firm. And I like that because as a teacher, you know, people can get out of control, and I watch how people control the audience. So tell us a little bit about how long you've been doing it, a little bit about your background. I know you went to Westboro High School, so you're a longtime resident. So tell us how you started out with this as your end result as being.
Okay, do you want me to start being moderator and then go back and tell a little story?
Yes, just tell
great.
the.
All right, well, I've been moderator for about 12 years. And I got to be moderator through following my predecessor, Joe Harrington, who I'd like to give special commendation to, because many people ask me, like, you know, how did you learn to be moderator? And it's like, there really is no training course. I like to tell people that I learned to be moderator by watching Joe Harrington for the 28 or whatever years he was at So he was considered, even amongst the Mass Moderators Association members, you know, one of the great moderators. And his father, I believe, was a moderator in Hamilton Wenham. And I had known Joe pretty much for quite a while. My recollection is that Joe and I were both appointed to the Citizen School Advisory Committee, appointed by the school committee. At the time, I think he was relatively new in town, and I was a senior in high school. So I got appointed by the school committee to this committee when I was 17. I was a senior in high school, and we sort of met there. And then I knew of him. He followed me. I went on to do many, many other things in town government and state government. And then probably about 20 plus years ago, he started calling me asking if I wanted to. First, he appointed me to the Capital Expenditures Planning Committee when it was new, because he was moderator, so I was an appointee to that. After I'd done that for a number of years, he called me a number of years and asked if I wanted to be on the Advisory Finance Committee, and I was very busy with my work and my family, and I kept on saying no, no, no. And then one year he said, you know, John, if you don't say yes pretty soon, I'm going to stop asking you. I'm going to have to stop asking you. And I think he realized the reverse psychology would work. So I thought about it, and I said, okay, sure, that sounds good. Talked to my family, made sure they were comfortable with me taking on yet another public service opportunity. And then about 12 or so years ago, 11, 12 years ago, when Joe was thinking of retiring, I was still on the finance committee. He invited me down for coffee, tea at Panera Bread, and he said, you know, John, I'm thinking of not running for re-election, but I don't want to not run unless I know somebody who I think could do the job well runs. And he pretty much said, you know, would you be willing to think about it? And I said, sure. So I thought about it. This was like the weekend before Thanksgiving. And went on, talked to my family, and I said, sure, I'll do it. And then I took out papers and got elected back in, well, let me look it up now, I'm going to get it wrong. I got elected as moderator back in 2014.
Now let's go back. You said you were in high school when you went on to as an elected person?
No, this is appointed by the school committee.
Appointed.
Yeah. So I have an unusual sort of track record in that I've been a public servant continuously longer than I've been anything other than someone's child. So, so this year, actually, when I was getting ready for this, I actually looked it up and dug out my resume. It was about exactly 50 years ago that I got appointed by the school committee to be on a school advisory council, which was, I think, about 11 or 13 people that were just going to look, we're going to do some research on some topics for the school committee. And I've held either elected or appointed positions at the state or local.
What got you into it as a 17-year-old?
Okay, well, let's see. Well, you got to remember, although I was a child of the 60s, but not really what you typically think of. I was very young for a child of the 60s. But I mean, I remember watching the Beatles on television when I was like 6 years old. Watched from afar because I was too young to be directly affected by it, but certainly saw the indirect effects of Vietnam, JFK, RFK assassination, Martin Luther King assassination, and all that. And I think I first real, probably, brash young kid, we all want to change the world, and we all think the world should be a particular way. And for some reason, I got latched on to the idea that if you wanted to change the world, you needed to try to understand how the world worked. And there were some things in high school that I thought could be done better, and some kids do that and they go like, oh, I'll be on the student council and do that. Well, I decided not to take that route. And when there were some things that I didn't understand about the prerequisites for certain courses, or one of my favorite teachers was going to get laid off due to a budget cut, I actually started going to school committee meetings. So as soon as I got my driver's license when I was like 16 and a half, I became pretty much a regular going to school committee meetings. And that got me to realize, that if you want to change, if you want to understand, it's important to understand the system in order to change the system. Being somebody who became a Beatles fan thanks to my junior high school music teacher Duncan Martin, affected by the '60s and reading about that and just saying, if you really want to make a difference, you have to work within the system rather than outside the system. And I wanted to learn how it worked, and that just kept on me applying my interdisciplinary thoughts, and just became an outlet for me. So.
Good. Now, you didn't choose to go into politics as a career, but you went off to WPI, correct?
Yeah.
And you became a...
I'm a software engineer by trade. I recently retired, so I retired about almost a year and a half ago. So I had a 44-plus year career in software engineering, software development, computer programmer. The name, what it kind of changed over the years of what you called yourself. And I'll attribute that to my brother. My brother was very, very good at art, but also, very smart. And he was watching me as an older brother. And when I was getting ready to go to school, he said, well, you're good at math and science, and you seem to like being around people. And what he knew is, it sounds like the burgeoning field of software back in the mid '70s. It sounds like people who are into software, like they're not locked in a lab. They have to talk to people to figure out how to program computers, how to take that. Say somebody says, oh, I want to automate a warehouse inventory control system. Figure out well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And he said, so it sounds like computer science, computers might be interesting. And so started off at WPI. Graduated Westboro High in 1975. Got my bachelor's degree in computer science from WPI in 1979, and then had a 44-plus year career as software development. So. Right,
and you mentioned, and so to keep you humble, and not that you have 7 patents.
Yeah, I'm a co-inventor on 7 patents. Wow. Thanks to a number of lucky positions I was put in, and also one of the things that led to that, I believe. Is it, as you'll tell from tell my stories, I've always believed in interdisciplinary, and I sort of grew up in an era when I gravitated toward being a jack of all trades, maybe master of none, although I do have a master's degree. But whether that counts as being a master of something, we'll let others decide. But I was pretty good at writing, so I typically would get asked to document the software I wrote back when there weren't necessarily full-time documentation people. And so applying creativity plus the structure of software development and the ability to write meant that I got approached by people to say we have this idea, can you sort of flesh it out, figure out how it would work, and then I would write it up, and that was good enough that they could hand that off to the patent attorneys to extract what the claims were. And after I did that a couple of times, sort of word got around to a number of my friends, and I had the opportunity to do that. So along with the creative part of actually solving a problem, it's how do you write it down so you can have a patent attorney figure out what's unique enough about it to be a patent. So.
Wonderful. And again, you're very multifaceted, but they all converge on this kaleidoscope thinking.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And that's what is what I'm always looking for in people and in solving problems. You were enticed by the problems you saw in the schools to do something about it. Then you took a position and training in computer science, and merged those two. But then a third area shows up from very early on is your interest and commitment to music.
Yeah. I mean, whether it's a commitment or not remains to be seen in the eye of the beholder. But yeah, I mean, I was a typical kid with parents, so I was fascinated by music. I think in 4th grade was when they first brought music into the school. You know, when you could do things. I mean, I don't remember. I don't think we ever went through the recorder phase. That's sort of a thing now. Everybody gets a recorder and you play. But I did snare drums, learned to do like street beat rudiments and things like that when I was in 4th grade. Got a little bored with that, and the funny part of the story is went on to start playing flute in 5th grade. And the behind the scenes, why did I pick a flute is because it was the smallest, easiest thing to carry to school. Because I was a little kid, you know, not very big. A trombone or something would have been way overpowering, and so it was sort of quirky. That I think probably up until like maybe 5 or 10 years ago, I made it one of the only, if not the only, male flute player throughout the band years. So I played flute like from 5th year on all the way through till high school, till senior high school. But I didn't like the shrillness of flutes in marching band. So going back to my street beat snare drums, I played drums in marching band in high school. So that was cool. And then along the way, again, Beatles influence and all that. Eventually picked up a bass guitar, decided I wanted to play bass guitar, and then guitar. I sort of took a few lessons, but mostly self-taught guitar player, and then fusing you know, the teenage, you know, college drama of angst and love and loss, life and death and all that, became sort of a hobbyist singer-songwriter, recording person. Again, back when multi-track recorders were first somewhat affordable, took that up as a hobby, and then been trying to get back to it now that I'm retired. Didn't have time for it for a number of years.
Yes. So we have you in school, taking all these musical instruments and learning on your own. You were a singer, which is also a talent, but also something that in the brain is very connected to problem solving.
Not necessarily a good singer. I'll throw that in.
Well, you know,
tolerable. Perhaps.
I grew up with a sister who sang opera. And we looked alike. We went to Catholic school and had the same uniforms. And she always had the lead. And she was always late. So the nun would point to me and said, "You're supposed to be singing." And I went, "No, sister."
Not me.
Yes, get up there. She'd make me get up there and say, "Sing," and I sing. And she goes, "You can't sing." And so when anyone says they can sing, I'm so envious because I never got to be the center of you know, that stage. So now we're going to integrate it back into your job and your passion about being the town moderator. There were some things that you did in your previous life that prepared you, because this is a very tricky because I watch as a teacher how people present, because that can either make or break something. You know, if you don't have control of the group, or if you don't have a personality to keep for 9 hours to keep somebody going into the, you know, their interest. And let me tell you, I try to be very attentive, but after the 7th hour, you're thinking, you know, are there any more? And you look at the list and think, how will I survive? But you manage to keep me engaged, which is a compliment, because
that's good.
My mind is always going in 7 directions as well. So you had talked about one thing that you did that started this idea of how you would present. And do you remember that was about taking a speech class?
Yes. So, well, this is where it goes back to having started in sort of semi-public life early on. You know, I was learned how to be on a committee and how to get your voice heard and seeing how people did the give and take of opinions when I was 17 or 18 or whatever. And then when I was a sophomore in college, so 1977, I was elected as a library trustee because I'd been president of the library club in high school, and had always been interested in libraries because they helped me out. And then as I got older, realized that they helped a lot of people out. 'Cause I remember my parents taking me in for like junior high school research projects to go to the Worcester Library back before the current library built its new edition back in 1980 or so. And so when I was library trustee, that's when, you know, we didn't really have the full open meeting law. There wasn't Westboro TV to show all the meetings, but you still had to talk about your budget in front of the finance committee or in front of town meeting. And then as an elective, I think my junior year at WPI, I had an elective. I was taking my computer science courses and my math and business courses and things like that. And there was a course on public speaking. Oh. And so I said, oh, that would be interesting. And so, because, I've never, like most people, not really comfortable with the sound of my voice on recording. And trying to get the self-confidence to understand how to speak and how to do persuasive writing and persuasive talking, and also just how to get to your point and try to do persuasive speaking by not talking about why you think it's so great, but why whatever you're trying to accomplish is good from the other person's point of view. So there's this whole empathy thing. So most people in college would say, no, I never ever want to do that. And I just said, well, there can only be so much homework, and of course the homework ended up being writing speeches, which was more than expected. But they put you in a studio sort of like this, gave assignments for talk about something you like, or here's a specific thing, and then here's 2 or 3 minutes, we're going to record you, and then, oh my God, you're going to sit down and watch yourself talk, and it's like, and so that helped me realize that one of the best ways to be comfortable with public speaking is to try to prepare enough that you think the typical cliche, hope for the best, plan for the worst, and figure the result is going to be somewhere in the middle. And so that led me on that path. And then again, and then later on in my work career, I was a software engineer at the old Digital Equipment Corporation, where this was the previous big hoorah of artificial intelligence. I was in an AI technology group where there was something called AI Winter, where we'd sort of peeked out at what that 1980s AI could do. And one of the jobs that I was able to take when a group was getting dissolved was in the AI training group. And so then I was expected to go back and teach some of the stuff that I had been doing and doing that. And it was a masterstroke of the manager of that group, since we were teaching, people paying quite a bit of money to learn about the vagaries and the details of particular languages. So this is probably like 8-10 years later, had us all take a course called Executive Technique, which is like a consulting company that usually prepares executives who have to speak to shareholders meetings and do financial results calls and things like that. But he had all of us do it as teachers, and learned about, that was another immersion like 8-10 years later, like, okay, time to go see how do you present yourself. So it's a little bit about how you look, like I forgot to do it, but it's like if you're standing up, take your wallet and your keys out of your pocket, put it aside so there's a nice trim look. But then it was all, here's more, record yourself, here's how to, to convey what you're trying to teach or what you're trying to tell. And again, more reinforcement of the way to quell your nerves is to feel that you have some level of confidence or expertise in your subject matter. And so that led me down the path of, prepare, set, try to set the boundaries of worst case, best case, and then hope that the result is in the middle. And so,
well, you took in and consumed the information, but the way your having 2 long conversations with you, your brain, that original brain that was interested in science and also in music, which are connected, your desire to write well led you to be able to do the patents, which gave you credentials in your career.
Yeah.
So always starting out with the core, your curiosity about what happens in a public meeting at 17 is really a testament to your intellect, but also just how fascinating a brain works as it's evolving. It is a kaleidoscope deal. You're over here and looking, seeing things, and your career has never been jeopardized by one or the other, but each has enhanced the other. And I do notice when you're in doing the meeting presentations, again, as a teacher, I watch, because I train future teachers, that you always have control of your hands and your body. There's no unnecessary words to get to the point. So even though it takes 9 hours, it's 9 hours of content, not 9 hours of walking around, and except I love the little humor about you have to take your steps so you walk up and down the stage.
So I ended up having to go back downtown and walk another 3,000 or 4,000 steps to get my 10,000 steps on town meeting day. So I didn't do quite enough pacing during the meeting.
So, and before your work as the moderator, you have to do I thought they just handed you, naivete, handed you the document and said, in 3 weeks we're going to be going over it.
Yeah.
Keep the crowd controlled and make sure you tell them when it's time to vote.
Yeah.
And that's not the case.
No.
So you have to actually analyze and work with the people who are doing the warrant itself, because it comes from you told me it comes from the word warning, that these were going to be the only topics. And I wondered how people didn't march off into, Netherlands with their ideas and how you keep them straight and narrow going down the pathway. So let's go back just a little bit to the idea of what do you do just before the town meeting, like maybe the month prior?
Oh, okay.
What is it that's driving you besides your work, because you just only recently retired, so you had a family,
Those very well partitioned life.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about that.
The preparation for town meeting, well, let's just talk about the annual town meeting because it's pretty much similar, but it's a little more intense. So the preparation for the annual town meeting starts by the committees and the departments in town, like in November, once the October special town meeting is over. People are already developing budgets and submitting budgets to the town manager to roll up into a final budget presentation. And because I appoint the finance committee, which are the 9 people, citizens who essentially do a deeper dive than most voters into the warrant, and since I appoint them, and in case they have questions, I watch most of their meetings, at home now that they're hybrid meetings or whatever, in case they have questions. So I'm watching the development of the warrant. The warrant itself, in terms of date, time, place, and what's on the warrant for the town meeting, is the responsibility of the select board. But of course, they typically check with me, and it's in the charter for when the target date is usually. I think it's the second Saturday after the town election, which I think is the first Tuesday or something like that. I should have brought a copy with me. And I see the draft warrants as they get developed, and the finance committee is doing the deep dive into their things. So I'm watching that and answering questions and learning. I typically read it over to make sure there aren't any questions in my mind about what are the boundaries and what are the warrant articles ask for, because as you pointed out, the rules behind town meeting are in order to keep it focused and going back to the warning, is the only decisions the town meeting can make are decisions that are within the scope of the articles that are presented to town meeting. So the article presents the topic with some boundaries, like how much money is going to be asked for, or what's the wording of a particular bylaw change, or doing something. And so I read them over to make sure I understand those and I can think about it. I hear the give and take of the finance committee, and then I start reviewing, and I actually create a notebook for those of you who see me at the front, where in between articles, first of all, I'm just out of habit, and it's the way I listen and learn, is I take lots of notes. So I have a notebook where I've prepared, for the weeks beforehand of here's articles like 7. Here's the text of it I have on the left side. On the right side, I have who's the proponent. As we get to the final days before the town meeting, I get word of this is the motion, the specific motion that's going to be made. Here's who's going to make it. If there's going to be a presentation, who's going to make it. So I have those names all. It can change at the last minute, but that gives me some sign. And it lets me see, is the motion they're going to make something that's within the scope, just to make sure there aren't any questions of, what's the right thing to do. And so I spend a lot of time listening to meetings, finance committee meetings, occasionally select board meetings, to make sure I see what's going on, and so I know what to expect. And then I spend a lot of time at my computer just developing that. There's a handbook of Massachusetts parliamentary law. So this is the newest edition, just came out this like a couple months ago, of town meeting time, which are sort of the rules of town meeting. So I go over the rules, like what requires a 2/3 vote, what's a majority. I get contacted by citizens who want to know, like, what can I do about this? Can I make a presentation? And I explain to them that it's all meant to be fair and open. So answer questions from I get a number of questions from people in email or on the street or whatever, saying like, hey, what about this? And I feel my job is to I don't take public positions, but my job, I think, is to help all the voters understand why town meeting is the way it is, what they can and can't do, and then if they want to accomplish something, I try to help them say, like, if that's what you want to do, here's the right way to do it. Because as you say, the way to sort of ruin town meeting and have everybody just absolutely hate it would be if people had to sit there while there's a lot of what about this, what about this. So I try to prepare the voters as well as myself, so it can be fast enough paced that it's not too boring, although admittedly, being a citizen legislator is not always the world's most exciting thing to do. And then just have it so most procedural questions that could bog a meeting down have either been answered already, or that I've prepared myself to say, if somebody says this, here's what I think what the rules are, and here's why I'm thinking this way. And I try to turn it into a meeting that's efficient, but not at the expense of having the necessary deliberation and outcome. But I also try to make sure that there's enough room for people to realize that, although it's serious business, there are times when it's okay to say, let's just take a step back. And I tend to make fun of myself and just to get people to say, it's okay. I know we're sitting here for 7-8 hours, and here's what's going on and why.
Yeah, and you do it so effortlessly, just explaining. And what I, again, observe is that you have an ability to change the tone of your voice. You don't raise your voice. You don't change your body language to be anything other than what it's composed, and but you have a stern voice when you need to keep people within the boundaries. And it's not anything frightening. It's not anything that would put someone off, but it lets them know.
Yeah.
You're
It's
teetering on the edge.
Yeah, it's serious time now.
It's serious
Right,
time, and let's move on.
Yeah.
And
thank you.
that's when I take a exhale. Say, okay, there is order to this.
Yeah.
What sometimes
Yeah.
because it was a very unfamiliar process for me. It's nothing I'd ever seen before. And the very first one I went to, we had ribbons or some kind of
the voting slips. Yeah.
right
Yeah,
put up, and I was like, I don't understand this. And so I kept going to see if I could understand them. But sometimes the language of those articles can be a little bit obtuse for someone who's not.
It has to be sort of legalese, just
Legalese,
because that's
yes,
the way it has to be. Yeah, so yeah.
So it was. It's not beautifully artistically written.
But it has
Maybe
to,
we
it
could
has
make
to
them
be
into
fine.
poems.
Yeah, well, that would probably
How's
be,
that?
But then we'd have to interpret them, and nobody would know exactly what they say. There'd be no right answer to that.
So you are directly answer to the select board.
No, the voters.
The voters at that meeting, right?
Yeah. But the role of the moderator is I won't bore you with all the history, but the history of sort of town meeting goes back to like the way the Puritan churches ran from the Pilgrims and whatever, where the members of the church would vote for the moderator to have the church meeting that would decide how the church spent its money.
Oh.
And so that's why town meeting is much more of a New England tradition than other parts of the country. And so that carried on. And so the way I describe it when I give presentations or talk to people, as you think about it, the town meeting is the town's legislative body, and that's why I like to call all of us there. We're not just random people. We're citizen legislators for the day. Though we all have our roles, we all have our jobs, or our whether it's being a parent, whether it's being a lawyer, doctor, whatever. But once we're in town meeting, we are acting as legislators of our town.
Oh.
And so when you think of we all sort of have this model that we grew up with, that there's the House and there's the Senate at both the state and the federal level, and so that's the legislature, and the legislature essentially they say controls the purse strings. Any money raised and appropriated has to be approved at town meeting. Town bylaws, zoning bylaws, things like that have to be approved at town meeting. So that sort of sets the way I describe it is it sets a high-level trajectory and priorities of the town. We decide to spend this much on schools, this much on police, this much on fire, this much on libraries, blah, blah, blah. And then the day-to-day running of the town is done by the executive branch. And this is where some people can get a little confused, because at the state and federal level, we have a singular president, we have a singular governor, and they run the executive branch. At the town government, it's a little more obscure than that, because the select board of 5 members essentially acts as the de facto head of the executive branch, and then they appoint the town manager and the fire chief and the police chief, blah, blah, blah. But it's more complicated than that, because there's a planning board that is responsible directly to the voters for the planning function. There's a board of library trustees, as you know, because I was one, you were one, that essentially controls the building and what's done at the library by the library trustees. But that's sort of just New Englandy stuff that's done that way. And so the select board, as a group of 5 people, are acting as the singular kind of president and governor in terms of being responsible for the day-to-day operation of the town, given the money and the bylaws that the town meeting has set. And so that's where you see that the town manager works for the select board as sort of the police chief, fire chief, and other things. And so it just gets a little confusing. So the select board acts like a kind of mayor of the town, but it's a body of 5, not a singular person. And that's where sometimes the analogy breaks down. And so just as each select board member, each library trustee, each planning board member, works for the voters, the town clerk and I also work for the voters. So
you have a very interesting take on politics too. You never once mentioned any philosophical points of view. You never, I wondered if people tried to influence you, say, hey, make sure you get this one in this position. I've never, even in all of our conversations, you've never made any reference to any political point of view.
Well, first of all, I'm not a joiner, so as you probably could tell, I sort of wildly independent in what I think, and so I don't belong to a political party. Don't technically belong to a church, although I have my own beliefs. But I think especially once I became moderator, one of the tenets of moderator and one of the things that I try to do, and I think all the best moderators try to do, is that your job is to run the meeting, and you have to have a deep, deep, deep faith that the voters will get it right eventually.
Okay.
And so I feel that my job is to never take a public position on anything. I will help voters for or against things, and I always tell people, my helping you doesn't mean I'm necessarily in favor of what you're doing. My job is to help the meeting run smoothly and to make sure the voters know what they're being asked to vote on. And that means that I have to swallow my pride, my belief, my whatever, and just say, if that's what you want to do, here's the way to do it with the least amount of problems at the town meeting, and then I leave it to the voters. So I went through, my whole sort of, if you call it public service, I don't call it a political career, I call it a public service career, was on the policy making and the persuasive side up until I became moderator. So when I was library trustee, as you know, the library has to advocate for their budget and for the, all the great things that libraries do for the community. When I was on the board of library commissioners at the state level, it was advocating for what we used federal and state money for to help libraries throughout the state. When I was on the Capital Expenditures Planning Committee, it was about how to prioritize, which capital projects fit in this year's slot. And on the Finance Committee, it was about, how we try to, advocate to the voters, this is how we think is the best way for money to be spent. And then all of a sudden, wham, you're elected moderator. And it's like, okay, not persuading anybody other than persuading people, if you want to do something at town meeting, I will explain to you what the rules are. and I will help you do what you want to do, within reason. And if there isn't a way to do what you want to do, I will point people to say, well, that's really a question for this other body. Why don't you go talk to them first? And
so you have multiple lives going on as, as a young person up through your retirement, which doesn't look like really retirement. Like I'm not really retired.
Right.
But I wanted to get back to the music because the music had a theme, through all of your conversation about musical groups who influenced you, and you talk about your time period because you're much younger than I am, And so the Beatles were, everything to me.
Yeah.
And I was old enough to, go to a concert or, be able to go out to hear them in college.
No.
So you had some interesting times with music that led to, again, other areas of your life. The music is connected to your personal interior world. You give out to the community, but you have certain things that are part of you that are unique. And one of them was, again, talking about the creating of the music yourself, which we will hear a little clip of it during this.
You have to tell me which one.
This particular program. But there's an interesting story about how you merged music with the technology.
Yeah. Yeah, so as I said, there's probably like 4 pillars to my life. There's my family life, there's my computer science life, there's my public service life, and then there's sort of my music life. And so I'll try to not bore with the whole thing, but the way I kept these 4 things hanging together so they weren't completely separate is I always tried to integrate them together. Essentially, it was a way to try to make time for them all. And so I think going back to when I was interested in popular music, and then eventually got interested in songwriting, and then integrated the songwriting with my technical interests and curiosity about how do you actually make multi-track recordings and doing all that. Well, over the years, what I learned as an undergrad at WPI in computer science, in terms of what languages I learned, those are very rarely used anymore. And so I consider when I talk about my career evolved by sort of constant reinvention. Luckily, the pillars I learned at WPI and at Brown go back to how do you decompose problems, how do you solve problems, and those are transportable regardless. But along the way, I had to learn new computer languages and things like that. And I was never, unlike some of today's, sort of like open source kids where they'll do a personal project and they'll do this. I could never find the time or have the interest to just do something just to sort of keep me happy. So I'll try to keep the story somewhat short. So I was a big fan of the rock group Emerson, Lake and Palmer due to my brother and things like that. And over the years became an ELP fan. When I had a job in Cambridge, when email was brand new, not everybody had an email address. There were these Usenet groups, they were called, and there was one called rec.music.synth because they were all dot in terms of it was recording .music and then sort of synth or electronic music. And there were a bunch of ELP fans on that I was following. And so a guy that I have only met once in my life, and I started this Emerson, Lake and Palmer email group, things like that. Then back, I think it was the early 90s or so. I had just started a new job. ELP had reformed. And for all you people who hate ELP, it's okay. I understand they're very controversial. And not everybody loves that kind of music, but it's okay. So I just started a new job, but ELP had reformed, and Greg Lake, the guitar player and singer and songwriter, was appearing at the old Tower Records in Boston to launch their new album. My wife had worked at the same job for a long time, so I couldn't take the time off to go meet him or anything. But I asked my wife, I said, will you go in, buy a CD, get him to autograph it, and then I printed out some of these ELP Digest emails that I had. And I said, and if you want to hand these to him, hand it to him. And he did. And then got the autographed CD, and I go, this is cool, look at that. And then like about a week later, I got an email from ELP's manager who said, like, how long have you been doing this? And I said, I've probably been doing it about like 8 years. And he goes like, oh. And he goes like, that's cool. And so long story short, eventually the band themselves heard of it, got to be good friends with Keith Emerson, who was the keyboard players and composers, keyboard technician, who then I got to be friends with Keith before he had died, met Greg a number of times, and then Carl Palmer, after ELP had broken up yet again, Carl Palmer had reformed his band, Carl Palmer's ELP Legacy, that's still touring, and one of the people in their team said, oh, come on out to California, we'll go to a show, I'll introduce you, whatever. And then in between soundcheck and the show, person from Carl's management team said, Carl, you've been talking about maybe having somebody different do your website. And I said, well, I can do websites. I'm a software engineer, blah, blah, blah. I can do websites. And so my sort of my sort of outside project was I took on as sort of as a free volunteer thing to thank them for their music. I said, well, I'll do your website for free.
For free.
And going back to the technology part, I said, so I had done hand-coded HTML for a website, but with Carl's site, I wanted to automate it. It still reeks of 1990s, early 2000s, because again, I do it for free. But I taught myself, PHP, and I learned a little bit more about web programming, again, because that was stuff I needed to know for my job, and I was working for myself as a company at the time, trying to do different consulting. So I factored all that in. I also want to give it aside because I forgot to mention earlier, all of this stuff you hear me talk about wouldn't have been possible without the support of my mother and my wife. So let's be really clear. I spent a lot of time going to meetings back before hybrid meetings and online meetings, and my kids would not have known who I was if it weren't for them letting me do all this. I realized I should have mentioned that because they made all of, I'm the crazy one, they made it possible, and to keep the rest of my family somewhat sane. And so over time, Carl Palmer, now personal friend, I go to the shows. I have like access passes. Still do his website. My wife and his wife get along very, very well. And over the years, just have used that as sort of a way to say, so here's my software world here. Here's my music world here. And my family and are all sort of know this is what I do, and this is one of the things. It keeps me current software-wise. It keeps me in the loop, and so I keep on doing that. So.
Well, you had, as a parent, a story that we're going to end with because it is just so charming. Yeah. And knowing as a parent and also having once been a teenager, I can see both sides of this story. It's just very sweet.
All right. I'm going to preface it. So my son is about 4 or 5 years younger than my daughter. So when I was on the board of, so this goes back to my daughter being a public relations professional, probably fits into her. If you look at my psychohistory, there's one thing, hers. So when she was little, and I was on the board of library commissioners, probably 5-6 times a year on Saturdays or Sundays, I would have to go either do groundbreaking ceremonies or I would go do dedications. My son was little, my wife would take care of him. I would take Jen with me just for something to do some of the times. And so she was used to coming with me to these things where it's like, I will go, I'll be in a town like Abington or somebody, who's doing a groundbreaking, and I would get asked to give some remarks, and she would follow me around, and I'd introduce her and things like that. So she was sort of used to me sort of just walking around and sort of being the visiting dignitary. And so that was when she was somewhat little. Then later on, I think this probably happened when she was probably late 20s, early 30s. As I said, when Carl Palmer, as sort of one of the people who help him out, Jen was finally home, and there was a Carl Palmer show up in New Hampshire. So I would say, well, I got an extra pass, Jen. Why don't you come with Mom and me? You hear me talk about this all the time. You know that I do this, but you've never actually seen the band. I'm not sure she likes the music at all or not. So we got there, and of course I usually get there early because one of the best times to talk to Carl and the band is between sound check and the show. And so we got up early to the old Tupelo Music Hall up in Londonderry, New Hampshire, wherever it was. And so we pull in the parking lot. Of course, like the only car there is like the people working at the venue and then the van that they travel all the kid on. And so it's outside, ELP used to play the largest concerts in the world. Now Carl plays, like smallish venues, probably hold 500 to 1,000 people. So it's a smallish hall. You hear the sound. They're doing sound checks. So Carl's banging on the drums, his guitar player and bass player or whatever. You hear that, and and there's the door, and you can see it's the door where the crew goes in. And so I'm going like, okay, let's go in and give a listen. Jen's going, no, don't go in there. They're in the middle. You're really not supposed to bother them. This is their job. I'm going like, no, Jen, it'll be okay. And so finally, I say, well, I'm going in, so let's just go in together. So we do that. I open the door. They're like, running through Hoedown or whatever song they're practicing. About 30 seconds after it, they're looking at the sound guy, take a break, and then Carl looks over for his drums and go, "Hi, John." and all of a sudden, she realized, like, oh my, you're not kidding. He really does know you.
So you went up a few notches as a dad.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us and showing us the multiple sides of who you are, as well as how the government, the the job you have as the town moderator works, and I will look forward to the next meeting
As much as you can, yeah.
in the fall,
October.
and I'll be watching very closely, so just so you know. But I want to thank you again for joining us.
Well, thank you.
And to enjoy your kaleidoscope, to match your kaleidoscope
The
thinking.
girl with kaleidoscope eyes,
Right.
except I'm the guy with kaleidoscope. Very nice, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And one remark to the audience. If you enjoyed learning more about John Arnold, please take your little beeper and press 1 for yes. But there is no to press. So thank you so much for joining us.